No worries.
And we're live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WP Café episode number 2. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at WordPress multisites. Thanks to those who joined us in episode 1 last month, where we talked about the block editor and developing for the block editor. And we're still got there. We've got there to episode 2, which is on multisites. So we've got a couple of guests today. We've got JJ and Johnny, and we've also got Keith. So I'll let them introduce themselves first of all, and then we can get stuck into our multi-site discussions. So JJ, do you want to tell us who you are and what you do?
Yes. Hi, I'm JJ. I have developed a multi-site installation for a client who has a series of books in an e-commerce platform. It has ongoing development, and I've been doing it for about 2 or 3 years.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Johnny?
Yeah, I'm Johnny Albert. I build bespoke themes for WordPress, usually white label services for agencies. I've built a number of WordPress multi-site sites over the years. A couple were for kind of franchise operations with some really nice functionality. When they spun up sites, it sort of generated loads of cool stuff, and no doubt we'll talk about some of the benefits of multi-site for that kind of operation later. And I found it particularly useful on a multilingual site I built. I explored a lot of different options, and actually I found that multi-site was the best for separating out the different territories. They could really customize the images and everything very, very neatly, and it contained the territory teams very nicely. So yeah, that worked really well for that.
Cool, we'll get onto that later. I think that sounds really interesting. And Keith, last but not least.
I'm Keith. I'm one half of High Rise Digital with Mark. And I guess our big bit of multi-site experience, we've run a few, but the major project for us was a build. I guess last year it lasted a couple of years. The project and the sites, I think we had a handful of multi-sites, and they were running 1,500 websites in the end or something. So there's quite a lot. It was pretty steep learning curve in some ways, but really amazingly powerful and a lot of fun to develop the system. But we did come across some challenges along the way that we'd like to discuss today, and just kind of talk about why multi-site's great, what's difficult about it, what can be achieved, how to get around some of those challenges, and some ideas for that. So yeah, that's me and
cool.
where I'm at.
I suppose I better introduce me as well. I always forget that bit. So I'm Mark, and the other half of High Rise Digital. I've been working with WordPress for a good 10 years or so, and I tend to focus more on the back-end side of WordPress now. Let Keith handle all the fancy front-end stuff. So that's kind of where we are. So, and this discussion is kind of like bringing all our experiences of multi-site together to try and let you guys know what's what. So we're obviously live, so we're on YouTube. So if you're watching, say hello, tell us where you're from, and do get your questions in as well. So it depends on what device you're watching it on, but on my screen there's a chat window to the right hand side, and you can stick some questions in there. I can't promise we'll get to everything, but it's really good to get some discussion going, and we can see if we can answer some of your queries or suggestions or discussion points as we move through. So I think before we actually start discussing multi-site, it makes sense to actually just tell people what it is. I'm sure lots know, but some might not know what WordPress multi-site is. So Keith, I'm going to pick on you to tell people what WordPress multi-site
I'm the least
actually
qualified
is.
person in this conversation.
And that's why you'll explain it better than anyone else.
Okay. So as far as I know, I think I know the answer, but as far as I know, WordPress multi-site is a kind of a mode that you can enable within WordPress to turn a single installation of WordPress into lots of different websites. So you can run lots of different domains and things off of one installation, and in doing so can share themes and plugins and functionality, and save on things like updates and maintenance, as well as lots of other advantages that I'm sure we'll get to. But that's my kind of brief.
Yeah. One set of files to run multiple websites essentially, and well, I was going to say one database. It usually is, but it can be more. But we'll perhaps get into that at some point. Anyway, so that's multi-site. It's certainly got some really useful cases. So I thought what we'd start off with is just, and I think we've covered this in the intro slightly, is like what have we done with WordPress multi-site? What have people worked on? Any really cool things that they want to share? that they've done with Multisite. So I know, Johnny, you mentioned a few things in your intro. So do you want to just perhaps expand on them, maybe the things you talked about and what you've actually done with Multisite and why it was awesome?
Yeah, it is awesome, Mark, actually. It's one of those things that some people just have never heard of or never found a use for, or maybe worked around this kind of issue in different ways. But ultimately, Multisite is a very, very powerful system, especially for the user cases that I mentioned earlier. I think for kind of franchise operations, where franchises get in trouble sometimes is they'll sell on their franchise, someone will buy in, and then they'll just go off and they might have half a style guide and they end up with a website that's sort of got the logo in and maybe using the right colors, and it's just not consistent.
Yep.
Whereas I think it's an absolute gem for franchise operations, because literally the couple of sites I built, and as I've mentioned, guys, prior to the call, unfortunately due to NDAs and all that kind of stuff, I can't get into like, here's some screenshots and here's some cool stuff working, but I can cover the sort of technologies and techniques that I used. For one in particular, it was really nice that when they created a new site in the network admin, it did things like populate a page structure, a common page structure, set up certain options, and it really was a real nice system. So you can do a lot when you create a site in the network admin, and it doesn't just have to be an empty vessel. So that, I think, franchise operations, ideal example. It was doing things like auto filtering menus. It even auto populated one menu with the pages that had been created. And it really was, they click create new site, and they could have a new franchise operation site up and running in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
They type in the content, give them a couple of hours. It's an absolute gem for that kind of thing.
Johnny, how much of that was out of the box Multisite, and how much of that was custom work that you had to do?
Okay, to be fair, obviously when you spin up a site, there's a couple of hooks that you can hit, the usual, a couple of action hooks. And I just hooked in off them and just built my own functionality. It's actually really, really simple. You kind of swap to a blog ID and you can create posts and stuff. So it's actually rudimentary code once you understand the couple of smart little bits that Multisite gives you. So that was really straightforward. The one that was a little bit more entertaining from a development point of view was the multilingual one. So, I'm not bad mouthing any plugins out there or any other solutions. I just found for my user case, I started coding in my own kind of multilingual, multi-field support when they're editing page and stuff. And I just thought, wow, even with one language, we're doubling up on all the fields, and it just spiraled into a nightmare very, very quickly. And I just had this brainwave. I was still in R&D deciding exactly the best implementation on the job, a day or two in. Yeah. And I just thought, you know what, I kind of went home, had my tea, my brain carried on working, then suddenly I was like, ooh, Multisite could be great for this. The next day, went in, rewrote all the code I'd written already in about half a day, and didn't look back. It was a brilliant solution, I think, personally, because with multilingual can get very, very tricky, and it can get quite intensive in various areas on database and optimization, whereas running it through Multisite was easy. Suddenly everything became easy. The page editor was easy because it was only for that simple site, yet it brought in, at the time this was really before block editor, so the custom meter fields just all dropped in really nicely, and it was such a clean editing experience, and it offered a lot of opportunities for them to, so some of it was in Asia territory, some of it was in Africa, some in America, and of course it's not just about the text content, is it, and translating that. It's about putting in regional specific images and stuff like that. So instead of having one blog section, for instance, a news section that was just, hey, here's all our news, and it's available in these languages. No, they were able, of course, with Multisite to have not just regional specific images and text, but even obviously down to the news articles, and it was very well received. And as I say, great way to kind of contain the regional teams as well. So they've got their, as you know, guys, you log into one of these Multisite sites as a normal user, and to all intents and purposes, it is basically normal WordPress, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get obviously the different user levels, and you get the different look and feel. But like you say, essentially you're on just a website, and that's all you see.
You're on your own WordPress install.
I think Multisite is a great example of a use case for Multisite. We'll come on to those in a second. Multilingual is a great example of a use case. We've had I don't want to say trouble with multilingual sites, but they can get quite complicated quite quickly.
Mark, it's okay to admit it. Everyone's been down that rabbit hole.
Absolutely,
they're tricky. You're right.
Let's move across to JJ. Do you want to just outline some of the stuff you've been doing with Multisite? I know you said you've been working on one specific one and doing stuff for that one.
Yeah, the use case was a lot like Johnny's. We wanted to keep consistent branding across the books. But also one of the client requirements was sharing the users. So users could log in across the network, and keep their username and keep all their details. These are sites with a lot of user-generated content. They have forums. You can submit recipes. They have, all that kind of thing. And that was really important to them because people, that's how they identify themselves. And they wanted to keep that consistent across the sites, which was both good and bad. Interesting. If you're sharing a users table, users get really large really quickly. But it's worked really well. And like Johnny said, you can just spin up another site, customize it a bit, and you're good to go. It's easy to do.
So in that example, what was a site? Was that in Johnny's example, obviously the site was probably for a location for a franchise, or it was for a language. But so in your instance, what is a website?
It's for a book.
It's for a book. So you've got lots of sites, lots of books.
Yeah. So some sites for some books with user-generated content specific towards that book.
All right, that's interesting.
And then we also have e-commerce on it, which I would not recommend. But looking back on it, that was.
And is that for each book has its own e-commerce section?
No, it doesn't. For all of the books, there's one e-commerce section, which has, again, a lot of user-generated content. It's an online course, and it because you share a users table, how things work across the network is really interesting. Storing things in user meta is not like storing things in your post table, which are kind of site specific. User meta is just there for anyone. So you have to kind of be careful about what you're putting in there, what people can see. If you had WooCommerce on two sites, enabled on two sites in your network, the billing address, for example, is once you change on one, will change on the other.
Yeah.
Because it's stored in user meta and not site specific.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning to those watching, if you don't know that you said the users in a WordPress multi-site are not site specific, are they? So the users are across the entire network. Now you can give users permissions on one site and not on another site, but the users are shared across everything. So that does make you mentioned some really interesting points there that you probably don't think about, like you change it on one and it automatically changes it on the other.
Yeah, and then when you're developing, you have to think about where you're storing things and how you want to store things. And if you have custom tables, is it a table specific to a certain site, or do you just add a blog ID, which is how it works.
Interesting.
That is a good one.
Do you want to talk a bit, just briefly, Keith, about what we've done with Multisite?
Well, I'll give the brief overview and then you give the good detail, I think.
Go on then.
Well, we worked with a company, I think we're allowed to say, aren't we?
Yeah, of course we are.
Called the Outsourced Marketing Department. And they are what they say on the tin. So they do marketing work for financial advisors primarily. And they have they also work for networks of financial advisors. So they've got their own direct financial advisors that they work with. And by work with, I mean they primarily supply content to, but also other services around marketing, obviously. But they also, some of their clients are these like networks of financial advisors. And each of these networks could have hundreds or thousands of financial advisors within them. So they wanted a system both for themselves and for their network clients to deliver websites. and they were going to be, low budget, kind of simple-ish websites, and they want to be able to spin them up quickly, but do something a little bit custom, but also to be able to deliver content to any of those sites that they want to within pretty much any of the networks. I think that was the ultimate goal, is that they could write a bit of content and they could say this bit of content goes to these networks, and within that network they could say that bit of content goes into these specific sites that have signed up for that particular type of category of content, for example. So there was kind of two things going on. There was the kind of site building side, so being able to spin up cheapish sites quickly that were customizable, but also to be able to deliver content to any of the sites in a kind of organized way. So those were the kind of big challenges, and we obviously used Multisite because it couldn't have really been done any other way. And we hit a lot of challenges. We loved the project, and it was a successful project, but we definitely hit some challenges that I hope we're going to talk about soon along the way. The things that we maybe feel like we didn't solve optimally along the way, but yeah, it was cool. It was good. I enjoyed it. It was a good project. Yeah. I think it was about creating sites quickly, wasn't it? And I suppose it's worth mentioning in a multi-site, you got the themes and plugins are shared across all the sites there. So if you want, like in your franchise model, you've got like a parent theme that everything uses, then it's just always there. It's really easy to use in that aspect, so it's good. Yeah. But that was a good project. I think the delivering of the content bit wasn't particularly multi-site specific. It could have been done without using a multi-site in terms of sending content to a website. Right. Yeah. But there was hierarchical networks and sites which did make that easier with multi-site anyway. So it was the more I look back on it was really complicated, but it was really good fun. So it's good. Yeah, it was good.
Cool. Sounds like I've got some really interesting uses. So I'm just going to go on to the benefits then. So we've probably covered some of these, but obviously WordPress multi-site is not perfect for every project, but it is perfect for certain projects because it has massive benefits. So JJ, what do you think are the biggest benefits of using multi-site, maybe in the project you've used or not, that WordPress multi-sites can bring to websites or to development?
I think it's a consistent branding. As all of us have said, it's easy to spin up a site that looks, pretty much like all the other sites. It's easier to just throw stuff in the customizer, so you get custom colors and, little bits and bobs. And, so sites can look distinct, but still on brand. And it is also really useful when you either have to manage users across a network or you want the same users to have access across the network.
To multiple websites.
Websites in your network.
So if a user logs into a site that's in a network, does that automatically log them into another site, assuming that they've got permissions?
No. Well, it would kind of depend how your multi-site is set up. Mine are on different domains, so it goes by your cookie domain. If you have a base site with just a plain URL and log into that and then try and log into a subdomain, it will probably work. It should work, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
But then you can't go back. So you kind of have to think about how cookies work. When you're doing that sort of thing.
Yeah, as you mentioned an interesting point. With multi-site, you can have completely separate domains, can't you, for every site? So like Johnny was saying before, to all intents and purposes, they're just separate websites to those logging into those sites. But they're actually obviously sharing everything in a multi-site, which is useful. Any other benefits, Johnny, that you can see?
Again, we're going to keep on covering this, but actually it's the consistency, which I think is absolute king. And also, we all work so hard crafting these themes. For once, instead of it just being used on one site, it was awesome to see it used on 20 odd. It was really good. And obviously from a future development point of view as well, the networks on these sites were 20, 30 max, so a lot smaller scale than your guys. But they could scale up to tens of thousands. Of course, that's the gem of it. But what I really like from a kind of maintenance point of view, and we all launch the site, it's perfect, and then future projects, future work, future extensions. I just love the idea that I can extend the theme I've built, and it can roll out to this network, and it just goes like magic. And frankly, if any clients are watching this and thinking about, do I need multi-site, do I want to get regional, do I want translation, it's worth the extra investment, because actually it's far cheaper to pay the little bit extra to get it built on multi-site, if that's applicable, than think, oh well, I'll build one site and I'll get the guys to kind of duplicate that, and we'll maybe launch something else off the back of that in the future. It's futile, frankly. It's much better, and from a developer's point of view, it's much better to launch and develop with multi-site rather than try and merge it in later. It can easily be done, but it just saves time.
We've seen some maintenance, haven't we, Keith? Maintenance benefits and things like that, because
massive.
Every time you want to update a site, if you've got a plugin that needs updating, you've got to log in and update it on multiple sites, or update it on multiple repositories, etc. Whereas multi-site makes that much more straightforward.
It's also
an absolute gem.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword though, that, isn't it? Because at the same time, if you're updating or making fixes to one of those sites, especially fixes, so updates are maybe something a bit different, but if someone has a problem on site Z over there, and you make a little tweak to make sure that the CSS works, that CSS has been pushed to everything, so it might have fixed that particular use case, but then you've got to think, well, how's that
what's everyone else?
You gotta think about the whole kind of network, but as we're all pro theme designers, I'm sure it's so consistent and perfect, you wouldn't have that kind of problem.
I know, I've never experienced that, I'm just saying.
No. If I could just throw in one extra little benefit, that I know that it's just come to me now, that was brilliant for one of the franchise sites in particular. So each individual site, they got the custom fields, and thank you, JJ, for reminding me that I actually did a really nice customizer implementation on one of them, where on the individual sites they could alter certain stuff, not colors though. But one really good sort of way of using the data in a multi-site install was, and it suits franchises, was that you have the sort of main website running off the domain at the top level domain, and then you have your sort of other sites spinning off that. Well, it's how you think you can use that data efficiently from each individual site. So in one of the cases, each one had quite detailed sort of opening hours and location details and Google Maps, blah 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 blah. If you actually think about this, each individual site, they just inputted that data, so it was on their contact page that was all set up for them. But then, of course, it was absolute child's play and very efficient to collect that data from the individual site. So I actually ended up caching it, but that's a whole nother story. But I was able to pull all the location data, and then on the sort of main corporate site, as new sites came on board, or even as they made amends to their opening hours or whatever it may be, it was just instantly pulling into the sort of our corporate sites page on the core site. So it was a gem, things
that's
like
made
that.
That's made easier, isn't it, because of the network? Because you can just sort of say, get me all of the sites in this network, and then loop through them type thing, and then spit all the locations out on the page. I mean, you could do it otherwise, but it would be a bit more tricky.
I mean, to me, I just, I always, when it comes to like content management and stuff like that, I hate the idea of a client having to update the same piece of information more than once. It should only ever be done once. If it's stored, well, why are you having to input it multiple times? So I think that kind of small example there again is as you said, Mark, there's ways of pulling data from sites. We can all do that. That's fine. But it just becomes child's play with multi-site.
It's just easy, isn't it? And like you said, it just gets updated quickly. That's good.
Really easy,
A good example there of a really good use of a multi-site for creating something for them. That's really
nice.
Good. Let's move along a little bit. Again, if you have any questions, I know there's a few people watching us, so do whack them in the comments section over there, and we'll try and get to them. We're going to look at setup and development setup, really, because it does throw up some challenges as multi-site in terms of development setup, certainly that we've seen. So I'm sure that the guests here use version control, we use Git, and we do that for all our projects. And I just wondered if there's some consensus as to, particularly for multi-site, but like what to version control, what to ignore, and how that setup sort of works. Because, like we said, everything is for every site. So how do you kind of manage that in terms of development when someone's developing a specific thing for a specific site? Is that the same repository? Is it a different access to the same repository? Is it a separate repository? It'd be really interesting to see how that's been set up. So have you any comments on that, JJ, about how you work? Because I know you work as part of a big network, don't you? And you put stuff into that network. So
yeah, it's not a massive network, but yeah, there are better ways to do it than I do it.
Okay.
Because we have a lot going on at any given time. There's development happening for the theme, for some of the functionality, for the course, all these kind of things. Everything is in a separate Git repo, and then pushed as and when it's ready. So we have, I think, 3 remote test sites, and then multiple local development. And at any given time, they're all slightly different.
Yep.
And I know there are better ways to do it, but I use deploybot because I can switch in between, Git branches and push to various servers to get it where I need, so someone can approve it or not approve it, or we can change something, or we can test it. So you
mentioned you have individual repositories. Is that
individual
for each
repositories.
Site, or for each theme, or for each plugin?
Oh, sorry. For each plugin. For each plugin and each theme.
And each theme, right, okay. And then they just get pushed into the content folder of the network when they get updated, etc. Okay.
Yeah, it's not very clean, or there's probably a better way, but I don't know that, a lot of people put the WP content folder in a repo.
Yep.
I don't know that would work for us because there's so many different things going on at once.
Okay. And what about WordPress itself? Is that not version controlled at all?
No, we do not version control WordPress. Okay. No.
So how do you update WordPress?
We're with WP Engine, so I use
automatically done.
Yeah, we do testing first on a separate, so.
Oh, that's interesting. It's an interesting approach. That we've not done that. We tend to put WordPress in version control, which, right or wrongly, it works for us. But again,
why?
There's options that say no.
Why?
No, but I mean, like, it's whatever works for you in your situation, whatever you're comfortable with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because one of the nice things about would be, like, for having WordPress in version control, would be like being able to clearly see the changes, that WordPress has made, and I think drill down on stuff that's going wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I want to hear from Johnny because he had a pretty strong reaction to that. So what's that all about, Johnny?
Okay, right. Like JJ said, and she's absolutely right. It's horses for courses, isn't it? It's different usage cases suit different situations, and as I said, I kind of white label out for a lot of different agencies and organisations and teams. I've seen all kinds of different ways of working, and I've seen a few times people putting the entire, the root directory effectively into version control, so you've got the whole WordPress install as well. I'm not criticizing, everyone works in different ways, but what I don't really understand is why you would need to put the core files into version control, because I can run a diff and see what's changed if I really need to. And also no one hacks the core of WordPress, and I can honestly say that isn't a joke. And if you are, you're doing it wrong, frankly.
Yeah, we're not.
So therefore, to me, I actually just version control WP content with a few exclusions. So obviously, I don't back up like uploads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the plugins and themes folder, and we can maybe a couple of other bits on some sites, but a lot of it's excluded. For me, it kind of creates quite a compact kind of system. So when I say other bits might be excluded, without getting into like full technicality, it might be things like, maybe build config or something like that. In certain situations, depending on who I'm working with and what is their level of comfort with technology, you might or might not include build files and stuff like that. So for me, I I version control the whole WP content folder. I think JJ's approach of sort of putting individual plugins into version control works really well. Again, in certain situations, I have run with that sort of build in the past on certain projects. We didn't necessarily have every plugin in version control for the site, but there were certain ones that it just kind of made sense at the time. But 80-90% of the time, I'll have one GitHub repo with WP content with a few sort of excludes, and that's it. Yeah.
So are there any, like, there's two different approaches there, and we've said that there's kind of pros and cons. So I'm talking specifically about whether you have a single repo, whether WordPress is in that or not, WordPress core is in that or not, or split everything up. So what, like, if someone's coming into this fresh, how do they make that decision? Like, what are the factors they need to be thinking about?
We've all decided on different things.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I think it depends. Like, if you're deploying, once every so often, and you're responsible for the whole thing, and you make a site and then kind of go and then come back and do, any fixes or something, then it makes sense to have WP content in a repo. Yeah. We're actively developing various things all at once. So we have a number of custom plugins that need approval or testing or, all these kind of things. And there would be too many branches. There would be too many branches of that repo to actually handle for us. So while it's messy, it works.
I think that makes sense, because I think the line comes from me is where if you are the sole person or organization that is looking after a project, then actually it probably doesn't matter what way you do it, because you've got control over that way you do it. So any of those ways would do it, and that makes quite more sense, I think, where you then put like content under control and you can manage all the things in it. But where you get other people coming along, obviously, then I don't know, I'm not enough of a Git expert, but can you give someone access to a Git repository and say you can only push to this folder inside this repository and you can only push to this folder? It gets a bit messy, because you might not want them to be able to do anything in such a plugin, but you might want them to work on such a plugin, but they've got access to everything. So I think that's where that gets a bit more tricky. Just one question for Johnny. When you do put the content folder in version control, do you ignore any plugins that are coming from WordPress.org? So you don't want to version control them, because they're essentially like WordPress. They're just
this is where I'm going to completely contradict myself. I put all the plugins that are used on the site, whether I've written them or third-party ones. There tends to only maybe be 3 or 4 third-party ones, and all the rest are mine, or written specifically for the project. But for me, from a sort of deployment point of view, it makes sense to kind of keep the plugins folder in sync with what is live.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that. I just wondered if that's the case. We've dealt with the idea of ignoring plugins and things.
I have a question for Johnny. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, like, if you hand off a site to a client and they need to keep their plugins updated, how does that work?
Okay, so I think this is where people kind of get a bit mixed up and can potentially go wrong with version control and plugins and stuff like that. So it's a good question, JJ. So say I'll give you a brilliant example, because this is where it went wrong about 3-4 weeks back on a site I was building. So we were using a third-party SEO plugin, which I won't mention, and Rank Math. And
oh dear.
And, I know it hurt. So I'm not a big fan of SEO plugins, but they're an essential part of every site build, aren't they? And I usually go to the good old Yoast, which let's not get into that. So the client decided we're gonna use Rank Math. So off we go. Okay, I've not really used it before. We need to pull the descriptions out into the page. Fine. All sorted. Then the plugin was updated, ran the update, and it broke some of the custom functionality. I did get in touch with them. They did fix it. That wasn't anything to do with me. I think it was just like, well, we got a bug and they fixed it quick. But so the process, JJ, to get me back on track would be that on my development site, or so local first, run the update, test. Then, if I'm happy with that, I use Deploy HQ to deploy. So similar to you, JJ, just different sort of name. Deploy HQ to auto deploy out to one or many servers. So then the sort of second wave of testing is to run it on the live server, but on the testbed domain, effectively, not the live. And then once that's checked, we're golden. The problem that you can get, and this is what I started off with saying, is that people forget that plugin updates, sometimes when they run their update procedure, they may do all kinds of stuff. It's not necessarily just file changes. They may alter their database structure of how they store data. They may change all kinds of stuff, and just running the update locally for that plugin and then pushing to live server and going, well, I've updated the plugin, that is not enough. You are missing out more often than not on the update procedure, that plugin actually doing stuff rather than it just being updated files. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, so DB Delta wouldn't run, would it?
Sorry?
DB Delta wouldn't run?
Right.
It wouldn't run if you're just pushing it? Or not?
Yeah, so my process there is I test local, and then if it's good, we're cool. Then it gets pushed up to GitHub, but it doesn't necessarily get pushed to the live server. I actually run the update, so manually in the admin panel on the testbed server, and that will do its kind of update scripts and database stuff and all that kind of stuff. And if we're golden, then it gets pushed out.
JJ, as I'm the least technical in the room, could you explain what DB Delta is to me, please?
It updates your data. It updates your tables.
Is it like a WordPress function or hook or something?
Yeah. So you can use it to like check the version of your database tables, and if it's like not up, if you've updated your version, it updates your tables.
Yeah. Okay.
And it does that, kind of comparison. I don't know. It compares the tables and like updates the tables. Yeah. So you use it to update tables.
And that won't run unless. If you've just pushed the files, that won't run, will it?
Yeah, well, because you'd have to run the hooks. I mean,
correct,
it could run, but you'd need to run whatever's it's hooked into.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Oh yeah, so that's really interesting. I never thought of that, because if you're missing a lot of hooks there.
Could be. You missed the update plugin hook, so you could run the files and then actually create yourself even more trouble, thinking, hey, I made some version control, and then whoa, why is that not working like it does on my dev testbed site?
Presumably, though, you could, and we don't, and maybe we should, is that you could fire a script on your deploy, couldn't you, to then basically poke the website, but then you'd have to know which bit to poke.
There would be ways around it, and obviously if they're plugins you've written, you know what's going on. At the end of the day, I'll look at the change notes on a plugin, but I'm not going to do a diff comparison line by line on a plugin update, especially a reputable one. So that is the process I take, and you can understand where that could fall down with version control and deploy. You think golden, well, not necessarily.
And it's also a lot easier to roll back a plugin if it's in version control. So that I think that's partly why I've been thinking about it now, why we put WordPress in, actually, because it's just really easy to just press a button and say something's broken, let's just revert it back, and then 30 seconds later it's back to what it was, and therefore it'll work. And then you can kind of worry about what went wrong and then start fixing it. Whereas if you don't have WordPress in version control, you're kind of left, how do I get this back to what it was? It's a backup job from the host, or it's something like that. And if that's not available in the host you're using, that becomes a bit more tricky. So I guess I'm a bit of a control freak, and I like everything available with a button that I can say, stop this from breaking.
I get it, and like JJ said, there is advantages to putting WordPress core in version control, because you can read the release notes, but if there's some specific bit of functionality that you want to check out, that has it changed, hasn't it changed, it's right in front of you, isn't it? In your
Herb mentioned that on the comments as well. He said that it's great for reverting back to previous versions, which is kind of what we just mentioned, which is a fair point.
I mean, personally, I've never had, not for about 10 years. I don't remember WordPress breaking anything on update. It's
Yeah.
always
it's
the
more,
nice stuff or stuff I've written.
yeah, it's more stuff breaks with the WordPress update. So it's like WordPress
Panic attack,
pushes an update
roll
and
it
something
back,
else is breaking because of the update.
Yeah.
So the quick fix is just revert it back again to get it working because it's the live site, and then we'll deal with the fix afterwards. That's kind of the thing. So interesting. Let's move on. Let's move on to staging, because with a multi-site install, staging is different because we're not just staging one website, we're staging lots of websites. So I just wondered, how do you stage? Do you stage a multi-site? How do you stage a multi-site? Do you keep it synchronized with live? Do you not? And if not, why not? And is that necessary? So I just wondered if you could talk about that, JJ. How does yours work? I know you mentioned you have several servers that you push it to. So
yeah, we have several installs that we push it to. We have the live site. There's a lot of user-generated content. So we have the live site and then copy it to another installation and anonymize all the data.
Yep.
And then use that installation when we need to copy it to other sites to test various things.
How do you copy it, out of interest? Is it a script?
It's actually WP Engine. One click, you copy from a backup. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then, so it's very easy and it works very well. And then we can download, the backup and use that if need be. But we never sync with live because, of the anonymization and the user-generated content.
How does the anonymization work? That sounds really good, but I just wondered how that... is it custom for your install?
Yeah. I just go in and turn all the emails into an MD5 hash that looks like an email, and change the billing address and take out all the payment tokens and stuff like that.
Right, cool. Yeah, you've got a lot to think about. Especially when there's payments involved, isn't there? And you're copying things
across.
I
know. It's nerve-wracking. Or like with Action Scheduler. I don't know if any of you use Action Scheduler that comes with WooCommerce. It works really well, but doesn't necessarily turn itself off when you're copying, so your actions can still run.
Right, I see.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So do you always push to like a staging site before you do anything live? And then test it, like Johnny was mentioning previously.
Oh yes. Yeah. It gets tested repeatedly over a number of sites.
And when do you create a staging site, like, I don't want to say on the fly because you obviously press a button in WP Engine, but is that staging site always there, sat there waiting to work on, or is it something that's destroyed as soon as it's like that piece of work has been done, and then you create a new one for the next piece of work? I don't know.
Kind of in between the two.
Right.
I keep one for a while, and then things just kind of creep out of sync.
Yep.
And then I'll destroy it. And then,
once you decided that's not working, just get rid of it and start.
Yeah, just like
Yeah, because for us, Mark, we obviously didn't have like 1,700 or whatever it was websites on our staging. I just wonder, what would have been the best approach for us, because we kind of, I feel like we never solved this problem really.
We actually had our install of Multisite had 700 sites on one of them, and I can't remember, it was about 450 on the other one, I think. They actually could have run on the same one, but we learnt how to host more than one as we were doing it, because we got to a certain number and things started going wrong, so we had to split it quickly to make it work. And then we learned how to make it work. Anyway, that's a different story. So yeah, it's a good point. So like copying all that across is actually quite onerous because it's quite large, because there's lots of database tables to copy across to stage everything. We never got a solution to that, I must admit, did we, Keith? Really, it's like we want to do some work on this site, so we need a local copy of it. That was difficult, that we never really got to grips with, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't know, JJ or Johnny, any ideas on how we could have approached that better, or people might approach that better if they're in the same situation?
For my 5p's worth, JJ's example is really good for this discussion, because it includes obviously sensitive user data and e-coms data and stuff like that. Whereas my cases, they're brochureware websites, basically very, very nice ones, but no sensitive information. So for me, what I tend to do is I don't keep it in sync with live. I will have a set of development data that builds up. So obviously, as we all do, as the site's being built, you've got an approval version, and essentially that is what gets taken live. So at that point, you've got a reasonable snapshot of site data that can be used for testing. But same as JJ, there comes a point where it's maybe so far out of sync, or you're testing new content that's been generated on the live site that's different to, there's certain content types of layouts or whatever that are now not in your testbed site and old data. And every client I've worked with has been fine with it not being in sync, because we're going, okay, we're developing this new page module, and actually we're just focusing on that. We know all the rest of the stuff works. So,
I agree. I mean, like having
it depends on the client though, doesn't it? I think some clients would want to see it mirrored.
But I think if you're working on a new layout for a blog page, for example, it isn't like absolutely essential that you have the latest blog post from the live site to make.
As long as you've got an archive.
Yeah. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think just coming back to what I was saying about our scenario where we wanted to sort of stage one of the sites when there was lots of sites, I think that there is Delicious Brains database migration plugin can sort of handle pulling a website out and then putting it into something else, into another multi-site. So that just wanted to throw a solution out there.
Cool.
So you can grab like the database tables for this one, and I think it now. I'm probably supported it for ages, but I think it now does the media as well. So it will pull the uploads and things as well, and things like that. So I've used it in the past for pushing sites into multi-site and pulling single sites out of multi-site. Worth having a look at that. It's WP Migrate DB Pro, I think it's called, and there's some specific add-ons for multi-site which are really good.
Useful.
We've had a few questions in. So Simon in Devon says, I have a question. Are there cases when you have multiple sites, but you would say multi-site is not the best option? So somewhere where you've got multiple websites, presumably with the same customer or things like something like that, but you say actually no, multi-site is not the right thing to do. I think JJ mentioned about WooCommerce being a pain, so I wonder if that's one of the examples maybe that you'd use. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I would not put WooCommerce on a multi-site again. I think that was a mistake. But also, if you have to manage the users differently, so if different users are going to have different access, and if you're going to have different plugins, if it's not like, Johnny has like his franchise sites, or like I'll have the multi-site network with the same themes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I believe you can show different plugins to different websites on multi-site, so they won't see like the whole list of them that's there. I don't think it's out of the box. Might be wrong. You might have to do some.
I've done something like that. I can't remember.
You can, but you don't. Or if you think at some point someone's going to want to take one site out of the multi-site, you might as well just have. It's so much easier to have single sites. A lot of stuff.
It depends, doesn't it? How many sites you've got, I think, as well. Like, because it's a benefit versus the cost in a way. Like if you've got 20 sites, they're all using the same thing. It's better to put them in a multi-site. Yeah. And if you know that you might want to move one of these in the future, you might well think, well, we'll take that hit in the future actually, because that's less likely to happen than the benefits of having all the 20 in there. But I think WooCommerce is a good example of perhaps one that is where the user meta is shared across. So like you were saying before, I don't know if you were listening at that point, Simon, but the billing details are shared across all the sites because of where the data is stored, essentially. Other questions. Ross says, do you keep all the WordPress files in Git? I think we could kind of, yes, we do. You don't. There's benefits and negatives and positives for that. He says, tell me later. Well, I've told you now. Michael Bragg says, how do you handle the changes between site URLs when moving a database from production to staging and local? For example, production URLs are .com and local URLs are .test. Is it as simple as just defining the WP home, etc.? Go on, Johnny. You're shaking and nodding.
No. It's honestly, I do it exactly the same way as I migrate a standard WordPress site. So, if we take the case we're in development or we want to move it or whatever, we got as Michael asked, a change of URL effectively. Michael will know this as well, that it doesn't, the site URL is stored all over the place. It's in post content and all menu options and serialized data. I do exactly the same as I do. And I know you could do it with WP CLI and all kinds of cool sort of bells and whistles. But I've actually always just used the interconnect IT search and replace script. Oh, thank you. That makes me feel better. I don't like command line too much. So that works. And I have seriously migrated huge, complex, very bespoke sites with that. It just works every time.
I think
it's actually easy.
Yeah.
It is. We use that. It's a great little script, interconnect IT. Search replace DB, I think it's called. If you find that,
I'll try and get a link and throw it in the comments.
Just super clean,
guys for
works every time. Yeah, and
one
thanks
thing,
to
one
the
thing
guys.
just to note on that, and something that Patrick has mentioned in the comments as well, is that that only allows you to change one string at a time. So if you have a multi-site that's using separate domains for each site, you'd have to go through and do that for every single domain. So domain.com to domain.test, domain1.com to domain1.test, etc.
Good point.
Patrick's mentioning that the WPDB Pro plugin does allow you to do several strings, so you can add all the strings in, and it will then, when it does the export, it will change the string. So that's quite useful. So
nice,
a nice little tip there from Patrick. Thank you, which is good. Okay, that's great questions. We'll move on to backups. Is the next sort of thing that is well, I don't know. Is it different or not than with WordPress multi-site? How do you back up, and where do you back up to, etc. Johnny.
I mean, for me, quality websites deserve quality hosting. So, you pay your money for quality hosting. Well, it's not going to be some 2-bit backup thing where you find out that they haven't backed up for 3 months. You pay for quality hosting and you will get the best backups you can get, which are straight off the server and automated. There's 1,000,001 plugins for this kind of stuff, but frankly, I don't like the idea of backups potentially being accessed by people they shouldn't if something got hacked and that kind of thing. WP Engine, SiteGround, they all, and a myriad of others have fantastic automated backup tools. The only thing that I would say on that is, you read about backup stuff, and you read this time and time again, that just because you're paying good money and have a reputable host, don't absolutely rely on it, because you should test it every now and again. And just because it says in the admin panel it's been backed up, actually pull it down, down the backup every now and again. Then you store it locally if you want, every so often, or you could automate that kind of thing, of course, with your own script, so you back it up to a cloud server and stuff like that. But for me, just with so many sites that I'm kind of either fully responsible for or semi-responsible for, I haven't got time to do anything manually. It's the maintenance costs, I would just be burnt to the ground. So, quality hosting, quality backup off them, check it every now and again. And it's not just a case of keeping your fingers crossed, just quality hosting. Yeah.
Anything to add on that, JJ?
No, I agree with it. I break my test sites often enough on WP Engine to have tested their backup procedures quite a fair amount.
I always said backups should be called restores, not backups, because they're no good unless you can restore them. So very well having a lovely zip file backed up. If you can't actually get at it and restore it, then it's just useless. It's pointless.
I mean, that's a good point about sort of using quality hosting and their paid backup solutions, is that restores are one click away as well.
Yeah. So, does restoring a backup from, let's say, one of the hosts you've mentioned, does that have any implications for breaking your workflow in terms of, like, we deploy from this service and so on? Does that break any of that, or does it just work?
Sometimes.
I've not had a problem personally, but obviously you've got to keep an eye on your version control, and the client has to accept they may lose a post or two possibly, But
JJ, have you had a problem with that? for?
Well, not a problem. I've just had to change my process a bit.
Yeah.
If I revert to a backup because I've broken something, pushed something that was broken, I can roll back, although sometimes it's really, really broken. So I will revert the site and then push a clean version, like, because it's an incremental push with deploybot. I'll just push the entire plugin again.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And so it doesn't sound like there's any specific backup things for Multisite in terms of like specific things you need to do or be aware of.
I think
the only
I was just going to say, Mark, the major thing is that presumably you're backing up or you're restoring the whole network.
Yeah.
So like there might be a problem with one site, but everyone's site is getting restored back to yesterday's version. So
that's right. You could get away with that by restoring just the database tables for a specific site, but obviously that's not going to change like media uploads and things. Yeah. You'd have to fiddle around with those. So I don't think there's a perfect solution to that. The other thing I was going to add is if you are using a plugin for backup, which I know the guests have recommended is not the best solution, and I would probably agree with them, but I probably would say a plugin backup is better than no backup if you can
definitely.
It. So
definitely.
If you don't, haven't got the facility in your host, or you haven't got the technical know-how to do a backup on the server, then a plugin backup is going to be better than nothing.
Definitely.
Some won't support Multisite, I would think, because of the way it's set up. So it's worth checking. I would anticipate that the good ones will, but it's worth just checking whether they do support a multi-site environment before you go ahead and back it up. It might just be backing up the main site's tables and stuff and not everything, so you need to be aware of that as well.
Also, probably worth mentioning, Mark, if you're going to rely on a backup plugin, and I know a lot of people use them, and there's some good ones out there, some really clever functionality, is be very conscious about where those backups are being sent to and stored, because I'm sure none of them do it now, but I remember back in the day backups and they were just being dumped into WP content. It's a major security risk. You're basically providing someone with an entire snapshot. If we take JJ's example, that would be potentially huge from a data sort of protection kind of point of view. So just be very, very conscious about where you're backing it up to. I would suggest that if they have functionality to back it up to like a cloud service, it would be far better than your web server.
Absolutely.
Or if it backed it up to a folder outside of your web root, if the privileges are set up correctly on the server, you are reducing the chances of them being able to, malicious people sort of basically knowing the path to the backups and gaining
Absolutely,
them.
yeah. I think backup's probably a massive other topic, and we can perhaps cover that at some point. But yeah, some good points to remember there, Johnny. Thanks for that. We've kind of come to the end. We've covered my last point on here was deployment, and we've really covered deployment in terms of talking about how we deploy. Johnny's used Deploy HQ. We use that as well. I think Deploybot is very similar. Basically, they connect your server to your Git repo, and then every time you make a change on the Git repo, you can either automatically push it to the server, or you can just go in and press a button to say, yeah, push it now. I'm happy for it to be sent, and that's really useful as well. So, anybody, anything to add, Keith?
Yeah, I guess I've got a question. This one's for Johnny. When you were working with multilingual, did you rely on any third-party plugins to handle any specific multilingual functionality? Did you have to roll your own? So I'm talking about things like, obviously, out-of-the-box Multisite you won't be able to link the specific about page in English to the about page in French. Did you build anything like that? Did you use anything off the shelf?
Okay, so multilingual is a can of worms. We said this at the start, and it can start to get very complicated and sort of weird, and the deeper you go down the rabbit hole. But actually, it is very simple. So if you talk about the sort of like language specific pages, so I'm on the about page and I want to see it in, I don't know, internationalized Chinese or something weird like that. Of course, we had the old little flags at the top and all that malarkey. The key caveat to the network was that when a site was spun up, it actually duplicated the content from the core site. The advantage of that was that then it could be passed on to a translator that was contained in that specific site, and they just translate straight into it. So that was nice. The key caveat was the URLs remain the same. So /about was /about on any of them.
Got you.
And that was I like clients to be able to edit sites and and have full editability, but that was the one thing that they were told not to change was URLs. I can see why. And with that, golden. No problems at all. Yeah, no problems. Oh, and you asked about specific functionality. I had to use no specific language type functionality or third-party plugins. It was all just deployed with Multisite, and obviously theme-specific code here and there, and a little bit of CSS for your right to left and stuff like that. But really, I couldn't believe how easy it was, frankly, after the route I'd gone down for the first couple of days on development. It just suddenly became very easy.
Yeah, very good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Ross has asked a last question. Well, not necessarily a last question. You might want another one. He says, I think you all talked about using Multisite for a single project and a single client. Has anyone ever used Multisite to host different client sites, projects? And if not, why not? And why, if you have?
I'm glad Ross asked this, because this is actually something we wanted to talk about and somehow we've missed.
Somehow we've missed it, yeah.
Thoughts, JJ?
It would depend.
Yeah.
It would depend who the clients were, how they were related, what sort of user permissions they needed for their own sites, because, those are kind of weird in Multisite. The admin of a install on a Multisite doesn't have the permissions of an admin on a single site, which could be good or bad. So if it were good, then Multisite would be good. And if they needed the same themes and templates, I suppose if you were like rolling your own franchise, like to take Johnny's use case, of having someone was talking about on Slack, like sites for butchers. So if you had this butcher network, maybe that would work.
Yeah, it's like a SaaS kind of web platform idea.
Yeah.
So none of you have used Multisite to host, for example, client websites that you built using WordPress to make maintenance easier because you just update everything once?
You mean different client website? No.
Different client. That's because
I wouldn't recommend it, frankly. I think the question is, have you basically used a network of websites to host completely independent websites? If that's my understanding, and I know that I know a couple of developers. I think Rachel McCollin runs her essentially site network. Her personal site network, I believe, is Multisite, and they're all different. And I think if you're sort of in the driver's seat and it's your own personal thing, it's kind of a cool idea. I really wouldn't recommend it for different clients. Maybe one client that had a number of sites, maybe. As JJ said, different usage cases. If you're talking completely detached, independent clients, there's no way I'd run it off Multisite. It's too much of a vulnerability vector.
Okay, so it's more of a security concern than anything else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting.
JJ, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. You'd end up like with a million different plugins.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Half
because
which weren't
everyone
used on most of them.
Yeah, if you had like different, specifications for each site, it would be like a big bad messy thing.
So we've considered doing this, and we're sort of almost in the middle of experimenting with it. And we've thought of the security concern, maybe not so much. We do have to have a think about that hard. But in terms of like the plugins, we find that the sites that we build, we're normally using the same suite of plugins. And we're starting to, and what we're trying to do now is as an agency, I guess, is try to build reusable solutions. So instead of just like, here's some custom code, bye. We'll build some more custom code here, bye. We're trying to build up an asset, like a code base that we can use and improve over time. And I think forcing ourselves into a multi-site environment might help that, but I totally get the concerns as well. So interesting that you both feel quite strongly against it.
Yep, but Keith, are they the same types of clients? Like, are they all in one kind of sector-ish?
Yeah.
Things in the same?
Yeah. And they'll have largely similar requirements. We do a lot of effectively brochureware, like custom brochureware, but brochureware websites. So yeah, we wouldn't take something that's completely like functionally unique and stick it in there. But like an average company website, that you're going to need X, Y, and Z plugin on, and it's going to have A, B, and C and D templates, and you're going to use Gutenberg these days, but maybe with ACF blocks or maybe with this and that custom plugin that we've built. It sort of started to feel like it was going to make sense.
I mean, you could monetize that, couldn't you, and just have people spin up their own websites? I guess this is probably not a conversation for this, but there's that. So it's you maintaining it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I don't know though.
I have a similar situation that, really, if you actually compared the code base of the last 10, 15 sites I built, apart from the theme, which of course is unique and built bespoke, the actual plugin stack is very, very similar. It's probably about 80-90% similarity. And really, if it's very theme specific to that particular site, I code it into the theme anyway. So you're right in saying about the kind of commonality of your what is effectively your starter stack. And I do get that, and I think this is where JJ's point comes in about version controlling the individual plugins. Like that makes a lot of sense when you're talking your starter stack, because I've everyone who's been in this game has got a starter stack, and what you actually find is, and I've found personally, is I started off with my starter stack is one repo, and that's Ace, and I just pull it down and boom, I've got all my toys and bells and whistles, and that's cool. It's not actually that cool, because you obviously then start building your project out, that gets its own repo, and that nice plugin out of your starter stack is then in that individual repo instead of its own, and that's where individual repos I think make a lot of sense.
Our starter stack ended up going very stale. It was great for like the first 6 months of using it, and then we weren't really updating it anymore. We would just clone it and then start building all the cool new functionality on the individual project. Which was totally the wrong way to do it. So in the end, it just kind of went stale and it wasn't actually useful. So I think the separate plugin repo approach and theme repo approach is a good one for that.
It is for that case, maybe.
Very good.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. Cool. Right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. I hope the people watching have enjoyed that. Looks like we've still got some questions coming in, but I think we'll wrap it up there because it's an hour and a bit. So thanks for joining us. If you want to watch more WP Cafe episodes, we're going to be having another episode next month. I'm not sure the exact date yet, but it's going to be roughly around the same time. So if you want to subscribe to this YouTube channel, you can do, and you'll get the notifications as to when we put the new one out. But we'll also put that out on social as well. So follow us on Twitter. We're High Rise Digital. That tends to be where we stuff out there into the WordPress world. So do follow us on there. And we will see you for the next episode.
And also, big thanks to our guests. And Johnny and JJ, do either of you want to share any contact details of Twitter accounts or anything? Or not? Just say no, I don't.
Ladies first.
Oh, are you seeing if I'm going to say my contact
details? You don't have
tonight? No, I'm Darcy Blows on Twitter. I don't talk a lot about WordPress. But I do also help run WP Hooked, which is a local London meetup, and everyone's welcome to join.
Excellent. Johnny?
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the WP Hook thing is something that I keep an eye on myself. Nice setup there. So I co-host the WordPress Birmingham meetup, which of course is virtual right now due to the usual, the C word and all that. So we'll be doing our next one in, I think it'll be about 2 or 3 weeks. I co-host that with Kirsty. So that's a lot of fun. We have fun with that. And I'm Johnny AUK on Twitter.
That's awesome. Cool.
So if you have any extra questions or you go, you're talking rubbish, Johnny, pick it up on Twitter. Let's have some fun.
Sounds good. Thanks to both of you. Really enjoyed that today. And thanks everyone for listening. And see you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.